Welcome to our Freedom Lovers Life podcast number 2.5. And why I'm calling it 2.5 is it's a little bit of an emergency podcast, given the new changes to, not that we always want to focus on Canada, but when you have a forest fire, you go for the hot spot. And right now, Canada seems to be the hot spot around the world in terms of crazy authoritarian tax grabbing changes. So here we are focused on a third episode, 2.5, on Canada. And I promise for the people from around the world, we are not just going to focus on Canada. We will be doing other locations as well. But in recent news in Canada, the government has changed the capital gains inclusion rate from 50% to 66%. And there's a lot of kind of misinformation going around about what that means. It's not that your actual tax rate is 66% on capital gains, but that the 66% of what you earn on capital gains is included instead of 50%. Now that might not sound, okay, that's like 16% more is going to be included, but it makes a big difference. And I think, we're going to talk about a few things about it. And my special guest here, first of all, I guess I'm Patrick Hebert. I'm the CEO of Eco Villages, and my special guest is the COO of Eco Villages, Erik Vik. And we are just doing this podcast, as I said, a little bit ad hoc here because there's a deadline on this change of going from 50% to 66%. It's in June, right?
Yeah, June 25th.
June 25th, and this is the end of April here that we're sitting at, so we're talking about less than 2 months away. So again, just to clarify, we want to talk a little bit about this capital gains inclusion rate change and what it can mean for you. And I think what kind of triggered me to want to do this a little bit is that when Prime Minister Trudeau announced that, I can't remember exactly how he worded it, but he said something to the effect of, we're going to make the rich pay a little bit more, right? Well, that's not really what this is doing. And I think anybody that's savvy in any kind of investment in Canada knows that that's not really what's happening. This is just a plain, way to pay for the deficit, or try to pay for some of the deficit that the government has created in the country. But, it's really a big difference because, as I was mentioning to you earlier, Erik, I have someone that I know in a family that they, young family in their early 30s, each of them working multiple jobs in order to try to get ahead, try to kind of maintain or get into the middle class. And so one of the things they did is lived in a small apartment and bought a second home with another mortgage, trying to use the earnings that they made to cover two homes as an investment vehicle, thinking that the prices of homes in Canada are skyrocketing, and they were right. It was a good investment. But here comes along the government and says, well, you worked really hard and you're not really in any way, shape, or form close to rich. You're just trying to get kind of back into middle class, and we're going to take a whole bunch away from you because that's not their primary residence now. So there's a lot of people in the country that are in that situation. And Erik, you had a few examples, I think, that you wanted to talk about in terms of what it actually means in real world terms.
Yeah. I mean, the first thing that I thought was like, if we have a bit of a clickbaity title, it's like, well, you just lost 50 grand. Okay, well, how would that look? So I solved it backwards, and let's run through a normal situation. So it is possible that you could have bought a house for, $250K and you're selling it for just a little bit over 800. And we've got a slide here. So under the old scheme, you have a gain of about 550K, which is not, it sounds like a lot, but I had a house a couple of years ago. It was about for 180K.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it's over $750,000 now.
Yeah, it sounds like ridiculous numbers to people maybe outside of Canada, but that's kind of what happened. I know a number of people my age that did that, right? Invested in got close to paying their own mortgage off and then wanted to, take advantage of this. And this was even on Vancouver Island, where they bought homes for in the $200,000 range, and now they're over $1 million. Right? Yeah. And that wasn't that big a time spread between them.
Yeah. Canadians, they figured out what was working. I was one of the last guys on earth to figure out that I should have been in real estate, but every other Canadian, they were getting rich on real estate. So a lot of people have a second house because, as you mentioned earlier, your principal residence is not subject to capital gains, which is great. I do predict in the next decade or two that they'll go after that sacred.
Oh yeah, that's only a matter of time.
Yes. Okay, so you've been good in the stock market, or you sold your cabin or your second residence, and you have 550K gain. So under the old scheme, 50% of that would have been taxable.
The old scheme being the current scheme for another.
That's right.
Well, from today, another
That's right.
7-8 weeks.
That's right. And we need to reinforce again that the capital gains rate is not 50%. It's just that you include 50% of your gain, and then it's subject to your tax rate. So in this situation, 50% of that gain would be about 278K. And if you're making that much money, you are automatically in the highest tax.
Which is what you say, 54%?
54% in Ontario and BC, a little bit lower in some of the smarter provinces. But we're doing Ontario and BC today.
So to clarify that, whatever you make in your capital gain is not currently, as we speak here, subject 50% of what you make is subject to your marginal tax rate. And your marginal tax rate is variable. So it's, depending on what you've made and who you are. But in this case, that bumps you up immediately to the highest tax bracket, which is the 54%. So it's, today it would be 54% of 50%.
Yeah.
And in late June, it's 54% of 66%.
Exactly.
So, sorry, interrupt, but go ahead.
No worries.
Make sure. Because I've seen a lot of stuff out there that says, you're going to pay 66% on your capital gains. That's not really true. It's bad, but it's not that bad yet.
Yeah, I saw a lot of TikToks too, and I was like, what? At least we have our facts.
Yeah.
So the tax payable would be about 150K, and in that situation, you would have a net gain after tax of 407K. So you got to keep 407 of it out of the 557. So under the new scheme, on the lower part of the slide here, as we mentioned, it's going to be 66.6% of the capital gain is now taxable. So when we run through those numbers, you're going to be paying 200K in tax instead of the 150. And so your net gain is 357. And so in this example, a $557,000 gain, you will pay $50,000 more if you do this after June 24th.
And that's significant, right? I mean, I look at it like, okay, take some examples, throughout the prairie provinces and the Maritimes and stuff. Maybe those aren't the types of gains you're getting, but in the Vancouver, Toronto, Victoria, you can easily make that type of gain, and you could double that type of gain in some cases, right?
Yeah.
So if you do double it, what are you looking at? Do you have a rough idea?
Yeah, so we could just double these numbers, right? So I did this on if you had a $557,000 gain. If you had $1 million gain, it would have a net impact of you paying $100,000 more in tax. I mean, that's enough for a lot in a different country. That's enough to put 2 of your children through university. It's significant. So if you're thinking about selling it, I mean, I pull the trigger for.
Yeah, I mean. Well, what I was thinking of, of course, we're down here in Latin America and we're building communities. And so as soon as I hear somebody's going to pay $100,000 to a government and they have an option not to by selling something now, my immediate mind is, look, we have homes, tiny homes on the beach in the Caribbean for just a little bit less than that as a rental revenue earning asset.
Yeah.
And so if you pulled the trigger now and bought something like that, you don't have to buy from us, but if you bought something like that, not only have you kept that $100,000 that you were going to lose, but you put it into something that's generating income. And go take that down the road and say, well, now I want to lose my Canadian residency and not pay taxes on that in the future. That's another episode which we're going to have. And but I can see like a bit of a. Well, I'm reading a little bit about it. That there's a lot of larger corporations that are kind of chomping at the bit here right now and going, well, there's going to be a lot of Canadians wanting to lose that second or third residency and put it on the market. And I was reading about one large, Chinese corporation that was just sitting there waiting for this to happen so that they could come in and pile up their assets off of these homes. So I thought maybe the market's going to dip because all these homes are going to come on the market, but maybe not if there's a bunch of buyers out there wanting to take advantage of, because then later on when the inclusion rate goes to 66%, they'll have 1,000,001 expenses in different ways of massaging that within a large corporation.
Yeah.
But this is just kind of another way where you take assets and homes out of the hands of ordinary people, and not the rich, or like I said in my personal example, ordinary people, and you're moving it into big corporations again. And it's just a trend. It's going on like crazy, and it's unfortunately a pretty obvious one. But
Yeah.
you had some other thoughts you wanted to share.
I had some deep thoughts.
Deep thoughts. What was that Saturday Night Live Deep Thoughts with John Handley?
Yeah.
Whatever the name was. That was hilarious.
I love to think about these things, and I get worked up about it, right? So a couple of months ago, I was thinking about, in my life, I know what the government is doing. I know what the world is doing. And there's a sense of frustration because you can do everything right and still not win. And so I was having this discussion with my kids, and I was just trying to show them this example of like how the government eventually steals all your money. And they're like, what are you talking about? And I'm like,
it's a conspiracy theory, Eric.
It's not a conspiracy theory. Let's look at some facts. All right. And it's by debasement of currency while income tax is in effect. So you can debase the currency, but
explain the debasement of currency
debasement of currency is just printing money. Right. So a loaf of bread 10 years ago was $1, and now it's $5, right? And it's getting crazy. So, but I want to make that distinction. Like, if you have debasement of currency, but there's no income tax, you actually survive because you'll figure out a smart way to do it. But when they're both in place, you're in trouble. I'm going to take you through an example. So let's look at this slide called Government Theft via Debasement of Currency. So let's look at an example where you know that the government is debasing your currency, and you're like, okay, I'm going to be smart. I'm going to put this in assets. So let's take it today. So 2023, you're like, I'm going to buy an ounce of gold. So an ounce of gold, I'm using 2,000 because a couple months ago it was 2,000. Now it's like, what is it, 2,200 or something? Gold is taking off. Yeah. That's good. So throughout history, an ounce of gold has always been able to get you a nice suit. Back in the 1930s, in the 1970s, whatever it was, they've always been.
That was the correlation.
Yeah, and it's still true today. So an ounce of gold is $2,000. You can get a really nice suit for $2,000.
It's a lot more than I pay for the suits I have. So.
Yeah, look at these suits.
What suit? Usually out in the country.
All right, so I've made an example, snapshot in time, 2023. A nice suit's $2,000, a loaf of bread's $5. So if we got 10% devaluation of the currency for 20 years, I just did some engineering math here, and that gives you a factor that your currency or your purchasing power is worth 0.12 of what it was when you made this trade. So in 20 years, 2043, you've done everything smart, and you're like, wow, my gold is now worth $16,450. I am smart. They've devalued the currency, but I still have my purchasing power. I can still take that ounce of gold and go buy a really nice suit, a Hugo Boss. It's $16,000 for a suit now. And people are like, what are you talking about? That's not going to happen. Okay, well, and how much is a loaf of bread now in 2043? It's $41. And my brother's like, you're so full of it. That's not true. You don't think that's possible? That's not even up 10 times. And we just went through an example that a loaf of bread was $1 10 years ago.
Well, it kind of just sort of triggers a memory that I had. One of my best friends and I in high school would go to the movies. And it was like these, what were they, the Glosset chocolate raisins or whatever.
In the box.
I love those things, right? So they had them at the movie store. And we were just, strangely enough, at like 16 years old, we were talking about this. So that's 40 years ago, right? Mm-hmm. So we used to laugh and say, I bet when we're like 40 or 50, these things are going to be like $4 because they have like 50 cents or something at the time. Yeah. And we'd laugh, saying like that no one would ever pay $4 for this little box of Glosset raisins or whatever. Yeah. The other day I saw them when I was in Canada not too long ago, and it was like $6.15 or something. It's like that. It actually surpassed my wildest.
It always
prediction.
Does. It always does. I mean, I remember when I was a kid, like a Ferrari, $100,000. Oh my God, how am I ever going to have $100,000?
Yeah.
What are they now? Well over $1 million. Right?
Yeah.
Anyways, you've done everything right. You think you're smart, so you sell your ounce of gold and you're going to go buy a suit. but there's taxation. So what I've done is I've just used the example that we just went through with the 66.6% inclusion rate. I've used the exact same numbers and everything. I think tax rates will be worse in the future.
Eventually, it's going to be 100% inclusion rate. And
for
sure. You said include your primary residence and everything.
And you know what they'll do? All these gold hoarders, they've made the price of gold go up.
All the wealthy people that hold gold.
Yeah, and it's not a wealthy guy. It's Pedro on the corner and you and me who had an ounce. Anyways, you think you can go buy your suit now. So you sell your gold, but 9,600 of it's taxable. Tax rate still 54%. You pay your tax, $5,000, and now you got $9,200 left to buy your suit. You can't buy a suit anymore. The government did absolutely nothing, and they took 32% of your wealth by doing nothing.
They got like both sleeves of the suit.
Yeah. But
all you got is the best.
You can imagine like generation after generation and generation, you're trying to do everything smart, and they just slowly take more and more of your assets. So what's the solution in this situation? The only solution that I can think of would be that you'd need to be somewhere where something is tax-free. You got a TFSA, good for you. That's awesome. But, you can only put so much into it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you got to live in a country where, because this debasement is happening all over the world. So I'm super excited to be here where I can do something smart and they're not going to steal from me. And a lot of people, I guess I'm just a little bit different than the average person, because that really offends me that a government can just steal from me without my vote.
Without your permission, right?
Yeah.
Well, we talked about it the other day a little bit, and I said, like, I had a mental shift maybe a decade ago, and for me, being a younger Canadian guy, I was like everybody else, this constant nagging, almost fear of the CRA. Like, what if I didn't do my taxes right this year? I'm going to get audited. I'm going to get penalized. I'm going to get in trouble. It almost was the point where it drove out investment. It drove out people wanting to get ahead, because it's like, it won't make anything. And what if I don't report it? They're going to want, now they want quarterly statements. And it just was on and on. And one day I just kind of woke up and was like, we put the government is only people. Right? The government is just the people we've supposedly chosen to put there. And they don't really have any power. And it's, I realize they do, and they have all the power in the world as long as you're there. But when I was able to get out of the country and move down here, I just laugh if the CRA wants something from me now. I'm not a resident. You do what you want. Ultimately, it's just like, it was very liberating to have that moment of going, you know what? The Canadian Revenue Agency no longer has any power over me. And I don't have to think at all. And no, it's this time of year, right? It's the end of April. And I think it was, that reminded me that this is tax time, like the deadline, basically.
I'm doing my taxes tonight.
And for years I haven't. And I thought, I remember that my birthday is at the end of April, and so it was tax time. And I used to think that was just a crushing blow to my birthdays every year. It's like, now I got to spend all this time trying to figure out, whether I've done it right. That, like I said, that nagging, I don't know, fear, but just that nagging voice that's like, am I going to get a response back from the CRA that's, no, I'm sorry, you forgot this, and we're penalizing this or whatever. Whether you were trying to do it all right or not, it was always that. That's the way I felt about the CRA anyway. So now, being down here, and any offshore income is not taxable. First of all, I've paid very little tax over the last few years, which is great. And probably more importantly, I don't care about the CRA anymore. And for you, fortunately, this year or next year will be your last time you care about them too. But
it's called freedom lovers.
Yeah.
That's what we're passionate about.
So my 2 cents to people in Canada, if you have a second residence, you probably want to get rid of it before the deadline in June, and look at other options. So if this area is growing, we've seen an enormous influx, not an exodus out of Canada, US, Europe, Australia into Latin America. And that's obviously driving the price of residences up. And that's a great thing for the people that are investing here now. So, the more people invest and do well in Latin America, the more they'll come. And, with all the countries, in our little conspiracy world, so many countries are becoming authoritarian, and, so be it, whatever you think of that. This is a way out of that. And so, we wanted to kind of create this quick little podcast to say, look, you have whatever, 7 weeks from today, or whenever we can release this video, 6 weeks probably from when it releases, but things are still pretty hot in the market in Canada. You can probably unload the property by then, save a fair amount of money in tax, and then look at other jurisdictions where you can put that money to work for you. And especially if you're looking at rental revenue, income homes and things like that, or just, if your plan B home is to get, something in your back pocket where you could go if you want to get out of the countries that you're in. So, we just wanted to get this out on the table and say, look, because talk to a lot of people, and a lot of Canadians sending me emails or chats or whatever. It's like, what do I do? Like, I'm going to lose a lot of money on this. And so this is kind of what we think you should do, is that, I think you've taken it, to the next step, Eric, with they're always going to get the taxes will always get you. So eventually our recommendation would be get out of the countries that are constantly increasing their taxes. But, in the short term with this particular capital gains inclusion rate increase, there is an opportunity to save yourself quite a bit of money if you're in that situation with a second or third residencies.
Yeah. Come on down. Join our tribe of like-minded people.
It's a great group.
Yeah. And I got some ideas for some future guests. I think we should interview one of our clients from New Zealand.
Yeah.
Because they're just overjoyed to get out of that environment. And I'd really like to see from their perspective.
I think a lot of our clients and residents in our communities would be interested in sharing their story. I think last episode I mentioned that we had in our Veritas village here in Panama, in Coronado, people coming to look at the community and wanting to live there. We had Italy, Germany, Netherlands, UK, Canada, US, Australia, New Zealand. Well, this weekend we were there again, and some other folks came, and it was Scotland, France, and Colombia.
Wow.
So it's like we're
United Nations.
Yeah, I know.
Less evil.
Yeah, exactly. The big positive United Nations.
Yeah.
But it's a great group of people, and a lot of like-minded people that are seeing what we're seeing here and what we're talking about every week. And so always happy to answer your questions. So please feel free to contact us. The easiest way is probably email. info@ecovillages.life is a good way to go. Or I'm sure we'll have all the information underneath this video. And of course, do that like and subscribe thing, because we wanted to spread the news. And please forward the videos if you find them interesting and useful to your friends and other like-minded people that are maybe in the same boat and looking for options. Thank you. Thanks, Eric. Appreciate it. It's always good to have you on the show. 2 out of 3 in the first one.
Well, I'm nearby, so that's pretty easy.
Yeah. Anyway, it's always fun to talk. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.